Hey, welcome to Real Talk, where I give real answers to real questions from real worship leaders. If you have your own question you want answered on a future episode, head right here to submit it, and I might talk about it on an upcoming episode. Got some really good questions this week. Let's talk about it. As a worship team leader, I'm looking for some advice on how to handle people approaching me wanting to be a part of the praise and worship team. What guidelines do you set concerning their church attendance, how long they've been attending your church, should they be a member of the church, etc. If you hold auditions, what kind of format do you use? Do you choose a few songs or do you let them choose their own? How often do you hold auditions? As you can see, I have a bunch of questions and will gladly take any significant advice and knowledge you would care to share. Thanks. First things first, I want to point you to a free resource I made down in the description below called the Worship Team Toolkit. In that, I will give you the answer to some of these questions in a format that you can actually use in your worship ministry. There's like my worship team code of conduct and the application that I use for my worship team down there. So if you want that, head to the link in the description below and you can pick that up. In that, though, to answer your question, you asked like 50 different questions here. So let's start. First things first, what guidelines do you set concerning their church attendance? I think that you're asking about like once they're on the team, do they need to be at church? And for me, the way that I communicate this to my team is I tell them we don't keep attendance. We're not like tracking your attendance, but we want you to be a part of the church. So what does that mean? That means that you don't just show up whenever you're playing on a Sunday morning. And I think really in my mind, like you're probably there 3 out of the 4 Sundays of a month. If you're only coming half of the Sundays throughout the year, then I think that's probably when it becomes a conversation. But the alternative to that is like I do want my team to have a break from leading worship. That doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't at church, but sometimes it means that they aren't at church, right? Like people have lives where they go on vacations. You know, church attendance is down because people are more mobile these days compared to 60 years ago. People are traveling all the time, and I still think that it's important to be a part of a church and attend regularly, but we have to understand what that looks like nowadays, and it's not like people are home 52 weeks out of the year. So keep that in mind. Think about what makes sense in your context with the people of your church. But I would say, 3 out of 4 Sundays a year is kind of what I would expect because, I mean, that's 3/4 of the weekends out of the year. I think that if you are going to be a leader in the church, you should probably be at your church at least 75% of the time. That makes sense to me. Second question, how long should they be attending your church before you get them on the worship team? And for me, the answer is anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And it kind of is on a per person basis. You know, I'll tell them if you want to be on the worship team, we kind of like you to get involved in the church first and make sure that this is where you actually want to be. And so like we'll check in after a few more months is what I tell them, you know, once you've been here for 3 to 6 months, whatever the time period is there. But I think that that's a good starting point because once again, these people are leaders in your church and we don't just want people coming up to be on stage, which makes them a leader in your church and people see them as a leader in the church. First of all, if we don't know them very well, so we have to have time to know them. Second of all, though, it's going to make things more difficult if your team is a revolving door of new people showing up to your church who just want to play music. For me, I've been leading worship for 18 years now, something like that. And if I went to a new church, which this happened, by the way, the first thing on my mind was not, I need to be involved in their worship team. The first thing in my mind was, I need to be involved in the church. And then, if this is the place where I want to commit myself to being a part of the family of God, the church there, then I will use my talents that God has given me to serve the church. And so I went through that process and I didn't ask to be on the worship team until 6 months in or something along those lines. So I actually find it like a red flag if somebody comes to my church for 1 week and then they automatically want to be on the worship team. And so that's why I put that in place because we want to get to know the people. We don't want our team to be a revolving door. People see the worship team members as leaders in your church and they have to get to know the people of your church before they lead them, and they have to get to know the culture of your church so that they understand how things work organizationally so that it's not a train wreck whenever they get on your team. The other question, should they be a member of your church? I think if your church has a concrete membership process, then yes, they should be a member of your church before they serve on the team. But for me, at my church, we don't have like a concrete membership process where you sign a paper and you say, now I'm a member of the church. Not that I think that there's necessarily anything wrong with that. We just don't have that at my church. So for me, the membership process is I've been coming consistently for 6 months and I have committed myself to the church body. So kind of the same answer to that question there. Then when it comes to auditions, yes, I believe that we should have auditions for people who want to be on our worship team, and we should be prepared to say no or not yet to people who audition and aren't ready yet. But we want to understand where these people are at musically because they're about to join the musical worship team. A lot of people say, well, if their hearts are right and they're in the right place, then they can join the team. But they can join any team and lead worship in any way that they want if their hearts are right. That's completely fine. But we are called specifically to lead musical worship, and so there needs to be a bar met so that we can lead musical worship and not be a distraction, and that's why auditions are important. Logistically, what does that look like? I like to send out 2 songs to people, probably 2 weeks in advance, and I would say, like, try to make this in the rhythm of when you'll be sending out your resources to your actual worship team members. So if you only ever send the songs out, a week in advance to your worship team members and you expect them to be able to learn them that quickly, then obviously this person's new to your team, so it's going to take them a little bit longer at the beginning, so keep that in mind and send them the songs 2 or 3 weeks out, but don't send it to them like 2 months out and be like, you have 2 months to learn these 2 songs, because that's not how it's going to happen in the real world, right? You're going to send it to them a week or 2 before, or if you're really good, like some of the worship leaders I talk to who I'm jealous of, they send it out like a month in advance. But try to keep it consistent with the rhythm of what your worship team actually gets. For this next question, I've got my friend Jimmy Cooper from Hey Worship Leader to answer it. Take it away, Jimmy.
Hey, Spencer, thanks for having me on here. Okay, our question is, I'm currently working with the youth worship team at our church. They continue to pick songs that are the Christian songs you hear on the radio, but aren't really appropriate worship songs. Do you have any advice with explaining appropriate song selection with teenagers? I'm planning to do a lot of worship workshops with them to cover lots of different things about worship leading, musically, spiritually, technically, etc. One of these would be a song selection workshop. When I do the workshop, I'd like to be able to give them a solid reason to the question, why can't I do any song that talks about God or Jesus for worship? What would you say in response to this question? Thanks in advance for your insight. That is a very good question. I think the main thing I would focus on, there's a lot that could be said, but the main way I would focus on shepherding the youth group is to explain the difference between personal and corporate worship. So this is an area a lot of worship leaders get wrong, not just youth. And I want to say, whoever sent in this question, to be encouraged with these conversations and the workshops that you'll do with them, because the impact will be had for years to come. So keep investing in them. Now, personal and corporate worship are, I like to think, 2 sides of the same coin. We have personal worship and we have corporate worship. So this will fuel the way we think about how we shape our corporate worship times if we have a clear understanding of this. So 6 days out of the week, we are called to have this personal worship time with God in a personal way. How we do this is through one-on-one time with God. We pray to God and we hear from God. It's a communion time. When I was a child, I think we always called it God and I time. Did you have your God and I time? And what this is just a conversation between you and God. It's this personal time of worship. We pray to God and we pour out a soul to Him, and then we hear from God. He speaks to us through His Word. And so that's what fuels our personal worship 6 days out of the week. But now we have this special 1 day a week, this special time, this set apart time called the gathering, where we're no longer individuals represented only by ourselves. We're individuals coming together. We're unifying. We're gathering together. It's a different time. I'm not just looking for this personal time with God. It's a new special time. And so what this does is that we sing together and we encourage each other. And I said it's 2 sides of the same coin. And what I mean by this is that they fuel each other. So our personal time of worship fuels the corporate time of worship, because we don't come in empty. Hopefully, if we're doing this right, if the coin is flipping correctly, our personal time with God has fueled us to when we come to the gathering, we're coming with encouragement, and worship is overflowing, and we sing together and we hear teaching together. And then the coin flips, and so now we're at the gathering, and we are now encouraging each other, and we hear from God through a sermon that is spoken to the whole church, and that fuels again our personal worship for the upcoming week. And it's just this coin that keeps flipping, and it's a system of worship, and it's two halves. We have this personal worship and we have corporate worship. I think you get that. So here's the things I don't want us to forget. Our personal worship is not a substitute for corporate worship. We cannot neglect the gathering. It says that in Scripture, in Hebrews 10. Go look it up. And number two is corporate worship is not a substitute for personal worship. And so what I mean by this is we can't neglect personal worship and expect corporate worship to fill that somehow. And so we do this when we hear statements like this. I've heard this, I'm sure you have too, where people say, I'm just not being fed at this church, or the lights are too dim and the music's too loud. I just can't worship. These statements, as true as they may be, are like symptoms of us trying to make the corporate worship time our personal worship. Things in the corporate time, and other people who maybe look different than us or smell different than us, and come, we're coming with all of our own individualness, and we're unifying. That's the beauty of the gathering. But when we try to make that corporate time our personal time, then our preferences creep up. And those are symptoms that we're looking at the wrong side of the coin, to keep up the metaphor there. So the one way that we guard this corporate worship time is to select songs that celebrate God in the gathering. One way we do this is to select songs that don't merely focus on the individual. Songs on the radio that was mentioned in the question, they don't have the same agenda. They're for the radio. And a lot of times we're listening to the radio in our personal time, in when we're by ourselves. So whether we're on the road, or we're at work, or maybe we're in our room and we hear these great songs, and there's nothing wrong with those songs. They're great for fueling our personal worship, but that doesn't mean they're appropriate for the gathering. And so as worship leaders and leaders who pick out set lists of songs for the church to sing when we're gathered, we avoid picking songs that primarily focus on the individual. That's why some churches have made the decision to never sing a song in the gathering that don't use plural pronouns like we and us. I don't think it's a hard and fast rule, but I think it should help guide the songs that we're picking out. And I think there's much more that can be said about this. I'm trying to keep this fairly short, and I think maybe me and Spencer should maybe commit a whole video to this topic. But I do want to leave you guys with a resource. If you're looking for a guide to help you as you're building set list each week, and you want to know some tips for thinking through different categories, I put together a song selection checklist. It's free, and maybe we can post it down below. It just, like I said, gives you categories to think through. How do I build a set list? How do I pick out songs for the corporate gathering? So hopefully that's helpful for you. Hopefully this answer is helpful for you. And Spencer, thanks for having me on. I'll see you.
Thanks for your insight, Jimmy. If you haven't checked out Jimmy's channel yet on YouTube, go ahead and head over to Hey Worship Leader. I'll link it down in the description below. I'm in a couple videos with him. In fact, in the very first video, he called me the wrong name, so that's kind of funny. I'll see if I can find that video and link it down below, but he called me Spencer Cormandy, and I had to correct him. So check that out down in the description below, and go say hi to Jimmy. When should we start playing Christmas music? How many Christmas songs should we choose to sing during the Christmas season, and how much should we sing a week? Perfect timing for this question, because as of me filming this video and this video coming out, it's almost Christmas time, and so we need to start thinking about those things. And as of me filming this video, I actually just started to think like in depth about Christmas planning, and I had this very conversation with somebody at worship team rehearsal last night. And so let's answer, there's a couple questions here. When should we start playing Christmas music? I think the first Sunday of Advent, you go for it. And so the first Sunday of Advent this year is November 27th. For me, my church is doing a Christmas series, so it's going to plan really nicely. As far as how many should we sing each week, I kind of view it as like a progression, and the closer that we get to Christmas, the more that we sing. And so the first week of our Christmas series, I think we have a really strong tie to our Christmas series this year, so it's going to be like really obvious that it is Christmas. So I might do 2 this year, but there are 4 weeks of Advent, right? And so in my mind, it makes sense to do 1 the first week, 2 the second week, 3 the third week, 4 the fourth week, and you're like kind of building towards this Christmas anticipation. And obviously it depends on how many songs you do in your service. And so for me at my church, we do 4 songs during a service, so that's why I kind of view it that way. But if you do more than that, so I don't know, adjust the ratio accordingly. And then you also asked, how many Christmas songs should we choose to sing during the Christmas season? I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule there, but if you take what I just talked about, where you're progressively adding one more every week, you probably don't want to do the same ones every week, where you're like, this first week we're going to do Joy to the World, then the next week we're going to do Joy to the World and O Come All You Faithful, and then we're going to do Joy to the World and O Come All You Faithful and Hark the Herald Angels Sing. So if you take what I talked about earlier and you're going to do 4 songs on the last Sunday of Advent, then you should probably have maybe 6 Christmas songs so that you can switch a few out and you aren't just doing the same 4 over and over again. And then, of course, when you get to Christmas Eve, it's pretty much all Christmas songs, right? So for our Christmas Eve, we always do more music than a typical Sunday. So we do, maybe 6 or 7 songs, and they are like all Christmas songs. A couple modern ones, but mostly traditional Christmas music. So I hope that's helpful in your Christmas planning. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below. I have a couple other videos coming out about Christmas stuff coming out soon, either this week or next week. I'm not sure when, but I think that that'll be helpful for you in your Christmas planning as well. So make sure to subscribe if you aren't subscribed. And also down in the description below, check out the worship team toolkit that I mentioned earlier. That'll give you everything if you want to build your worship team. It gives you the worship team code of conduct, a complete document that you can send out to new worship team members. And I also share with you my worship team application form that you can use in your worship ministry to vet people before they join the worship team. So check that out down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me today. If you want your question answered on a future episode, head over to leadingworshipwell.com/realtalk and submit your question there. Thanks so much for joining me today. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.